This is the
Five Stars
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. What do you guys want to talk about?
Well, pal, guess I was trying to come back to work. Yeah, I know, highly improbable. But when it comes to Vincent K. McMahon, never doubt or underestimate that man's ambition. You know, it's so odd, too, because I'm going back and reliving a lot of these Retro Raws from 93, and every single time I go back and see that old babyface announcer, Vince McMahon, I'm almost baffled by what his character ends up becoming several years later. It's one of the most remarkable things when you look back at WWF history. If only I had a way to, predict what the future of the company would be in late 97, headed into 98, someone would have asked me up front, would you ever believe that Vince McMahon would become the evil billion-dollar corporate leader? Just would have thought, nah, man, ain't no way that's going to happen. Oh, little how I knew. And granted, some things never changed when it came to the kind of content Vince wanted to feature on television. There's a reason we look back at the WWF in the early to mid-90s with not-so-fond memories. It was indeed every bit as cartoonish and hokey as we all remembered. I still think it's a million times better than a lot of the shit we get in today's business. But, we also have the vision of hindsight to see where things would end up going years later. Before we get into Retro Raw this week, as well as the SmackDown report, make sure that if you're all checking out the FSWR for the first time, that you subscribe, comment, and like the show. We produce new content on YouTube and Rumble every week, Monday and Friday. Still going strong here in 2022. And while the mileage we've gained on the show is slow and steady, we're still gaining viewership and new eyeballs with every show we do. And I always like to take the time to thank the people that decide to stick around and come back to check out the podcast every week. And I always encourage you to stop back and check out all the future content we produce. No matter how abysmal things get and no matter how crappy the modern product is by and large, I'll always try to make it worth your while by filling the void by talking about classic wrestling, just to give you perspective on how things used to be before the business totally went to hell in a handbasket. And yes, I know Retro Raw circa 1993 is not the best model to showcase that. I still honestly prefer going back and watching a lot of these retro shows and most of the stuff being put out on television today. But with that said, let's dive into this, I guess. Since I really didn't have much of a segue into the Retro Raw show, it was a thing that happened. Looking back on how boring last week's show was, it was going to be kind of hard for this to be any worse off. And while it was certainly not a blow-away show, I can at least say this. I didn't nearly fall asleep like I did watching last week's Raw. But we opened with a VTR of basically what the whole show was built around. The official rematch between Tatanka and Ludwig Borga. And they kind of went through the whole development of everything that went down a couple months back. The first match they had on WWF Superstars, where Borga got the win via finger on the chest. Then they shot the afterbirth where Yokozuna came out and gave Tatanka the bonsai drop. And if you remember, they used that angle to write Tatanka out of the Survivor Series match. So this was the show where Tatanka was out for revenge, as he stated clearly in his pre-taped interview. And while that was being set up for the main event of the show, we went down to ringside where Vince McMahon introduced us to our guest color commentator for the program, Shawn Michaels. Wouldn't have been my first pick. I like Jim Cornette as the color guy a lot better. Now, that's not to say Shawn wasn't good as the color guy, because, he was perfectly fine on the program. It was odd hearing him refer to Owen as the guy living in Bret's shadow. A rare instance where Shawn actively went out of his way to put over Bret on television. If only we had known where it would lead several years later. So that led us to the opening bout for the program, the official in-ring debut of Double J. That's JEFFJARRET. After approximately 9 months of repetitive, non-stop, insufferable Double J vignettes, where he was boasting about his music career and vowing to use the WWF as a stepping stone to advance his singing career, we finally get to see Jeff do pretty much the only thing he was ever actually good at in the business, wrestling. Now, let me say this up front, because for any of you that watched my Dynamite report on Wednesday night, I went on a fairly nice little tirade about Double J. And I want to make note again, for anyone that may have watched that review, I want to stress the point that I do not hate Jeff Jarrett. I have always valued the guy as a worker, and while I will never belittle the guy's ability when it comes to his ring work, when it comes to the way he was pushed in the latter stages of his career and the forceful nature of the way he was presented as a main eventer / world champion, that was where I always took issue with. I never bought it. I never liked it. And the fact that I had to essentially suffer through a period where Jeff Jarrett was in a main event picture, not in one company, but 2 fucking companies. Can you kind of understand why I've had a little bit of a grudge with him over the years? It's always a touchy subject, because while it's easy to recognize that, yeah, Jeff was a good wrestler, yes, he understood the business, and yes, he was competent and knew what he was doing, I also can't look past the fact that for the better part of 10 years, I had to watch this same guy get rammed down my throat in a spot on the card that he had no business being positioned in. The same Jeff Jarrett that for the entirety of his run in the WWF from 93 to whenever he came back for his later run in 98 or 99, who was always positioned in a mid-card spot because, let's be frank, that's exactly where he belonged for the entirety of his career, not where he was plugged in with WCW or TNA. And, I know a lot of that had to do with the guys he worked with at the time and some of the people that were in charge of overseeing his booking back in the day. But for what it's worth, the WWF version of Jeff Jarrett is always the preferred Jeff Jarrett for me to go back and watch. At least it's believable. And, going back and watching Jeff here in his debut match with PJ Walker, it was fine. Jeff did all his patented heel tactics that he was well known for. Of course, stealing the Fargo strut and doing a god-awful impersonation of it. He's out there sporting that wretched WWF apparel at the time. I honestly don't even know what you would call that upper body strap he had on. I remember he wore that getup in WCW for a period too when he was doing the Horseman Alliance in either like 96 or 97. It looked tacky even back then. In any case, he worked it like a classic Memphis-style match, did every heel tactic in the book you could think of, including the spot at the end where Double J gives Walker the DDT off the ropes, and of course he makes sure to grab a handful of tights to get the pin, because, he's a dick. But this worked. I have no qualms with anything they did here. I know Jeff can work. That was never the problem. The problem was the way he was featured in other companies that probably should have known better. It's what happens when you give the boys too much creative pull. Eventually they'll be smart enough to know how to manipulate the office and weasel their way into positions that they otherwise would never have gotten into. And I know that'll probably rub Jim Cornette the wrong way, but calls it as I see it, man. Late Nitro Jeff Jarrett and TNA Jeff Jarrett was insufferable compared to the WWF version, especially if you witnessed it in real time like I did. I guess I can tack on the AEW version of him too, because I'm sure I'll get fed up with that run before it's too late. I think I already am. But in the meantime, I guess we can all vote on the WWF hotline to try and convince President Jack Tunney to book Lex Luger in the 1994 Royal Rumble match. Now, if you'll recall from the SummerSlam 93 stipulation, there was a clause in the Yokozuna-Luger contract that stipulated, win, lose, or draw, Luger would never receive another WWF title shot as long as Yokozuna was the world champion. And even though Luger won that match via countout, in one of the stupidest booking finishes in company history, he obviously did not walk out with the title, even though he still technically has a victory over Yokozuna on pay-per-view. So, they kind of use this as a calling card to hold over WWF management and try to get Luger another opportunity to get a shot at the title headed into 94. And, we'll get to the finish of the Rumble match when we review the actual pay-per-view in January. But, right away you can kind of see they're setting the stages for where they were headed into Mania season. They may as well have just put up a graphic that read, spoiler for the Rumble match. However, it is important to remember, things did not go exactly as according to plan. So even if they were kind of making it very apparent where they originally wanted to go creatively, well, plans change. Let's just leave it at that. On the topic of big plans, makes you really wonder if Vince ever had one for men on a mission in the WWF. Judging by the way they were booked for their entire run as a tag team, my bet would be no. Now, of course, with it being Christmas season, Mom came out here sporting these Santa hats, which admittedly did not blend well with their purple and white ring attire. And I think Sean kind of summarized what everyone thought the moment these guys came out for the match. Man, I really hate that theme music. Well, at least Sean and I could find common ground somewhere. So they had a hideously bad match with Dwayne Gill and some other dude sporting knockoff Rick Steiner gear. I think my only takeaway from the entire segment was that somewhere during this match, Shawn Michaels made a reference to Mabel being on the same diet as the guy that won the Argentinian pig eating contest the same year. Even in the late 90s, people were not afraid to fat shame others on broadcast television. Honestly, I have nothing else to add beyond that. Mabel won after giving one of the job guys a second rope splash, wherein somehow he did not break the rope in doing so, which was mildly impressive for a man that weight. And that took us directly over to Todd Pettingill for a Royal Rumble card update, which I forgot actually took place on a Saturday night in 1994. January 22nd. How about that? You get so accustomed to WWF running the Sunday night specials over the years, you almost forget that they used to run pay-per-views on Saturday nights too. Anyhow, Todd ran down the card for what they had announced at the time. Obviously, the big title match for the show was the infamous casket match between The Undertaker and Yokozuna. And I do not use the word infamous lightly. It's, well, it is quite that. Very infamous. But I think a lot of you already knew that if you had any historical reference. The other title match they announced was Razor Ramon and IRS for the Intercontinental title. And that one stems from last week's show where IRS came out to the ring with Razor's stolen gold necklace. So I guess that match is being billed for all the gold. It is for the IC title and Razor's fake golden necklace. And to top it all off, He ran down the rules of the 30-man over-the-top rope Royal Rumble match. We had, I believe, 9 participants announced for that match of this current episode, or as of this current episode. We have Bret and Owen Hart, Mabel, Shawn Michaels, Diesel, Crush, Kamala, Doink, and Scott Steiner. Why Rick wasn't announced, I don't know, but I think we already kind of discussed how Rick and Scott were in the doghouse with management by this point anyway. Actually, now that I think about it, did Rick ever wrestle another match for the WWF again? Maybe he had like a couple matches here and there in 94, but I can't remember off the top of my head now. No. In any case, we'll keep announcing more names on the future episodes as we're still about 4 weeks out from the event as of this point. And when we came back from break, we launched right into the Ludwig Borga-Tatanka rematch. And I will say this from the onset. I had no memory of this rematch ever happening on Raw. And judging by the way the finish went down, I think I remember why it was so unmemorable. But holy shit. If you would have asked me how hot the crowd was going to be for this match, I don't think I ever would have suspected they were going to be this boisterous. The nuclear reaction this match got from bell to bell was insane. It's like watching fucking Hogan Andre all over again. For Tatanka versus Ludwig Borga. These people were blowing a gasket during this match. And you know what was so ironic about it? Considering the match had Ludwig Borga in it, and he wasn't particularly remembered for being a great worker by any stretch, this wasn't half bad. It was shaping up to actually be a pretty exciting TV match. They had a very steady back and forth match for the few minutes they had. You know, Tatanka ran wild early on. Borga was selling well and taking all these great bumps. The people were staying behind Tatanka for pretty much the entirety of the run here. You know, both guys were working hard, feeding for each other really well. They did several near falls where the people went crazy when Tatanka almost had Borga pinned. You know, I was thinking the entire time this is going on, why do I have no memory of this match taking place? This is really good. You know, while the match is going on, out come Mr. Fuji and Yokozuna to watch at ringside. Tatanka goes up top, tries to do a big splash onto Borga, but Fuji cuts him off by hitting him with the Japanese flag. People are obviously pissed about that. And then Yokozuna just casually walks into the ring for the blatant DQ. The ref rings the bell. And I was like, oh, okay. Lame fucked finish. Now I remember. So the heels are ganging up on Tatanka, and out comes Lex Luger for the big heroic save, and he winds up taking Borga out, gives Yoko another one of those kind of, sort of, but not really body slams, where he gets him about a quarter of the way overhead and then just kind of drops him because, well, you know, Yokozuna was fat. And that was pretty much everything to the segment. It was 3 minutes of pretty good fun wrestling, followed by a lame duck DQ finish and a stereotypical schmoz where the heels are eventually run off in the end. I mean, it was okay. It was a bummer. I was kind of hoping for more than that. I'll tell you what I wasn't looking forward to. Ludwig Borga feuding with Lex Luger. Yeah. You know, for the little time that feud actually lasted before Borga kind of got canned altogether, but that is a feud that's forthcoming. Prepare yourselves. At that point, well, first we had Shawn and Vince kind of recapping everything that went down after the break. It was not really noteworthy. And then we went to a wacky, bizarre segment where Howard Finkel introduced us to Captain Lou Albano, who came out to the ring to wave to the fans and shake Finkel's hand. Also, they could immediately segue into an atom bomb squash match that had absolutely no tie-in with the Albano appearance. So why they had Captain Lou out there for a special cameo, I couldn't tell you. Last we saw him on Raw, I believe he was managing the Smoking Guns, totally at random for no discernible reason. Here he was there to have a verbal jousting with Harvey Whippleman, and that was pretty much it. And then he just left. And at that point, I wrote virtually nothing down about the match because it was an atom bomb squash. It was painfully boring and not all that interesting. I think my favorite gimmick with Atom Bomb is them randomly filming reactions from young kids in the crowd. I think the point was that we were supposed to believe that they were all scared of him, only every single time they would cut to one of the kids in the crowd during his entrance, there were like 3 facial expressions that were going on. Confusion, apathy, and in the case of really young ones, outright boredom. If the goal was to make Atom Bomb seem intimidating, mission failed. So he won with the Atom Smash, the Jackknife Powerbomb thing. Looked more impressive when Kevin Nash did it. So moving right along past that, we go directly into our next multiple set of god-awful vignettes for another upcoming debuting character. We had 8 excruciating months of wacky Double J vignettes in Nashville. Now we're about to endure a series of vignettes for the upcoming debut of Sparkplug Bob Holly. Oh, good Lord. God damn, I forgot all about Sparkplug Bob Holly. Oh, God, the WWF sucked during this period. I really, truly underestimated just how fucking rotten the business was during this period. Sparkplug Bob Holly. How in the world did I stay a fan of the product during this time? I have no idea. Yeah, you all remember Sparkplug Bob Holly, right? Or Sparky, as we would call him for short. The failed NASCAR driver gimmick they tried to saddle him with. You know what I forgot about, too? I didn't realize that when they initially shot the vignettes for this, he wasn't even referred to as Sparkplug Bob Holly. They were trying to get him over as Thurman Plug. Do you even remember that? Yeah, because with a name like Thurman, how could you not get over like $1 million? And whereas the WWF had experimented with multiple failed gimmicks around this period, good old Sparkplug lasted a little over 6 months. This shit went on for years. Obviously, he'd become Hardcore Bob Holly during the Attitude Era when he was doing the stuff with Crash over the Hardcore title. And that was all well and good for the time, but this fucking Sparkplug garbage was death television for this poor sap. And Vince refused to drop the gimmick. They were going to ride that failed experiment until the day it died. I mean, it died on day 1, but they were never going to give up on it. It almost ended Bob Holly's career as we knew it. God, fucking Sparky. What can you do? I think the real question was it worse than the new Midnight Express run with Bart Gunn? It's a question we ought to ask Corny. I mean, they both sucked, but which one was worse? But getting off that subject as quickly as possible, let's move on to the next segment, shall we? The story development with Bret and Owen gets edgier and edgier week by week. The brotherly tension is so thick you can cut it with a knife, dude. So we learned that Owen laid out the challenge to his brother Brett. He's tired of living in the shadow. He wants Brett to step up and prove to Owen that he's just as good. But as we learn from Brett here, there's a fine line that he refuses to cross in the business. And he learned that under no circumstances do you cross family lines. So he refuses to fight his brother Owen. Can't will up the ability to put himself through that kind of situation. So the answer is no. And I'm sure Owen was not going to take too kindly to that answer. But that'll be for another time, because he went out to wrestle a match here. And you know how I constantly make those cliches about guys wrestling broomsticks whenever they're basically going out there and trying to carry a whole match by themselves? Well, that's basically what they sent Owen out to do here. Whoever this job guy was, Mike Bell or Mark Bell, doesn't matter. He was fucking atrocious beyond belief. He couldn't even take a simple head scissor takeover without spiking himself on his head. Made even more insulting by the fact that Owen actually let the guy get offense in on him. Thankfully, he wound up tapping him out with a sharpshooter. And much like the Brett match from the previous week, they did not really follow up with anything. Owen just beat the guy with his finish, and that was that. And they're really milking the tension with the two brothers here and not trying to dive into things that abruptly. They're letting that feud simmer. And we do have a while before WrestleMania season, so I get why they didn't want to immediately rush into this. That's all well and good. You know, there's no need to rush into storylines when you can take your time and build up the things over a period of time. In AEW. You know, I mentioned before how the Owen-Brett feud was easily my favorite thing that I ever saw Owen do in the WWF, and it kind of opened my eyes in realizing just how great Owen actually was as a talent. I talked about it before. I always preferred Owen over Brett anyway, and I think this program was the catalyst for making me recognize that. Might be a controversial opinion for some people out there, but I was an Owen Hart guy. I was never a Brett guy. Just the way it is. But it's funny, too, because I was never a Shawn guy either. So it's like trying to find the lesser of two evils. But then we had the best moment on the whole show. One of my all-time favorite Paul Bearer moments. This fucking ridiculous over-the-top skit they filmed with him and Undertaker. Preparing the double-braced casket for the match with Yokozuna at the Royal Rumble. Shooting the thing in what I believe they sold as the Undertaker's warehouse. Because, you know, if there's one thing you would expect the Undertaker to own, it was a mechanical warehouse where he was operating heavy machinery and saws and power drills. So obviously I can't do it justice in trying to review it because my Paul Bearer impersonation is beyond abysmal. I've tried. My voice is just way too deep to get it perfect. So allow for me to play the audio so you can all get a sense of the genius that was Percy Pringle under the Paul Bearer gimmick.
Oh, yes. Welcome into my Undertaker's private workshop. It is here where my Undertaker painstakingly assembles his many works of art. Many a departed soul have nestled down in the comfort of my Undertaker's quality caskets. But for you, Yokozuna, a special one-of-a-kind casket will be made for a one-time only match. Oh, yes, but Yokozuna, when my Undertaker stuffs you into this double-wide, double-deep casket and slams the lid shut, there on the inside, inscribed, glowing in the dark, will say, "Rest in peace."
What more can you say? Taker and Paul were the best. No other two human beings would have been able to pull off that gimmick. And again, I know, the casket match, it is historically bad. And yes, I know I'll have to talk about it when we review the pay-per-view, but I can't diss the pre-tape. It was too perfect. It was peak Paul Bear and peak Taker circa WWF in the mid-90s. If you were going to do cartoon comedy, get it right. And these two, they got it. I honestly wish that would have been the ending to the show. Instead, they followed it with this completely random, completely pointless head shrinker squash. They killed two geeks in a short match, and while it was all taking place, Vince McMahon was plugging Donald Trump's, at the time, second marriage with then-wife Marla, asking us, the viewers, if we could believe that Trump would spend $2 million on a tiara as a wedding gift. To which I then answered, even Donald J. Trump fell for the facade that is the institution of marriage. Blue-pilled thinking. And of course, you sit there and realize that $2 million is disposable income for Trump, so how much did he really lose out on that investment? The answer is, not a whole lot. All of that was entirely more interesting than the match, by the way. Fatu hit the top rope splash for the win. It's funny because you would think somebody like me would actually enjoy watching big, mean, ugly Samoans beat the crap out of scrawny job guys. Gotta be honest, though, by this point in the show, I was just kind of over it and wanted them to take it home. And that they pretty much did. Right after that match, I believe Johnny Polo will be the guest color guy for next week's Raw. And I can only hope he does a better job than Sean did, because he was totally a non-factor on this show. Like, I can't even really say he did a bad job, because he didn't. He was just very ineffective. Not that I'm all that shocked by it. You know, if Sean wasn't putting himself over, he wasn't really useful in enhancing anybody's profile. And I know that'll piss off a lot of HBK fans, but just being blunt with you, man. Look at the track record. So we'll see how they round out the year in the final episode of Raw for 93. Considering it is a holiday edition, the tradition for the WWF is that they usually don't go out of their way to produce captivating programming, figuring that nobody's watching anyway. So we'll see if next week's Raw is one of those fuck-off episodes. Considering they have a girls match booked, I think it's a safe bet that they're figuring no one's watching. And yeah, boy, was that ever a foretaste of what SmackDown was going to be delivering on Friday night. Yeah. You know, it's so ironic. For years now, pretty much since like 2014 or 2015, when I actively started boycotting most WWE television, because for the most part, it's been absolutely rotten. The moment they finally canned Vince from the equation, everybody was immediately jumping on the TV shows are going to be so much better now bandwagon. Well, I'm watching it in real time. Vince ain't around anymore. He's not calling the shots. Can't really say this new creative regime is really lighting the world on fire. Albeit there seems to be less silliness on the show. I haven't seen anybody vomit black tar or talk to inanimate objects. But it kind of reminds me of watching those old NXT shows back in the day. You know, before all the rebranding and the NXT 2.0 bullshit. It's like, I remember watching those shows. They weren't offensive. They were just kind of boring and lifeless. They weren't really all that exciting, but because of the fact that the shows were only an hour, you could probably get away with that formula because We always kind of had the expectation that the TV shows were always building to the takeovers, which more often than not ended up being good. But I think it's always important to go back and remember that as much as we love to rave about Hunter's vision of the product and his eye for talent, well, we're kind of seeing Hunter's influence on these television shows right now. I wouldn't say he's exactly made a great impression in the last 4 or 5 months. And I know they're still kind of in a recovery period from a lot of the previous bad shit that had been started on television. He's bringing back a lot of people, but are the majority of these guys or gals really drawing in any benefit to the overall bottom line? From what I'm seeing right now, the answer is no. There's one really consistently good thing on the show most weeks, and that's the Bloodline, which is something that's kind of been going on for well over a year now. Yeah, the Sami Zayn stuff is a newer addition in the story, but, I think it's good to give a reality check that just because Triple H is sort of overseeing things from the top down right now, doesn't mean things are necessarily looking up for the product headed into 2023. I could say the same about AEW, I have, but I've always said at least Dynamite can be considered train wreck television most weeks. It's like watching the dying days of Nitro where it was just high comedy. SmackDown is, I don't even know at this point. Beyond the fact that it's just boring and bland as fuck. Like I said, the stuff with the Bloodline is great. And they were kind of a centerpiece for the show, which probably was the reason I wouldn't consider this an all-around bad episode. Gunther and Ricochet was really good too, but we'll talk about that in a while. Aside from those couple of things, there wasn't a whole lot worth spending time talking about on this one. And that includes the opening segment. Kicking things off with a fucking Liv Morgan match. Yeah, that totally won't make people want to change the channel. It's ironic too because her theme music always starts with some chick going, "Watch me." That's about the last thing I want to do whenever Liv Morgan's on television. So her and Tegan Nox wrestled Io Sky and Dakota Kai from Damage Control. Women's tag title match, by the way, because those are still a thing apparently. And all I wrote down was 5 girls involved in this segment, and the one that I actually want to see wrestle is out on the floor playing cheerleader. Io pinned Tegan with a moonsault, if you care to know. Which I then immediately go back to ask the obvious question. Why did Triple H bother to bring back Tegan Nox if he was just going to beat her in her second or third match back? Isn't that like the polar opposite of what you're supposed to do when you're trying to get talent over? I don't know. Speaking of things I don't know about, or quite frankly at this point, don't really care about, this fucking Eli Drake Bray Wyatt stuff. Or LA Knight, whatever his goddamn name is. I'm over it. I've officially run out of patience trying to care. I mean, beyond the fact that I still have 100 million questions surrounding everything they've done with this storyline since it started, I think the most obvious question is, how in the hell is LA Knight either breathing or walking after all the horrible shit Bray's done to him? Aside from trapping him underneath a bunch of rubble for the last 3 straight weeks, apparently the angle they shot on last week's show where Bray attacked Knight in the locker room, they set up some kind of QR code so people could see the aftermath of the segment, where Bray had hog-tied LA Knight in a dark room, threw an Uncle Howdy mask over his head, duct-taped his mouth shut, only for them to immediately cut to a pre-tape on this show where LA Knight is walking to the ring totally unscathed. And aside from Michael Cole saying something to the extent of, well, there's no way LA Knight isn't fuming over the incident from last week, apparently whatever Bray did to him last week led to him freeing him on his own recognizant. Because there LA Knight was, back on the show to cut a promo 7 days later, totally none the worse for wear. Pissed off, obviously, because he was kidnapped, but there's no visible bruising, scarring, no emotional trauma after whatever in the fuck Bray did to him last week. No, he's just out there doing a promo like it was a normal day at the office. Did LA Knight bother to file a police report after having apparently been kidnapped last week? Did he try to have Bray arrested for what he did to him? No. He just went out there to do his catchphrases and, if I'm being frank, basically cut a point-blank honest babyface promo about Bray Wyatt. He put over Bray as one of the most talented people in the business, said he was one of the most talked about guys when he made his return, talked about how he's a former WWE champion. I'm starting to wonder, why are you putting this guy over when he basically left you for dead over the last 4 weeks? But I'll try to look past that. But he says ever since he came back, he's played dress up with his dumb Halloween masks. He's whined and griped playing the victim mindset. He's spouted a bunch of incoherent bullshit that nobody understands and never gets to the point. Which, Jesus Christ, he sounds like me talking. He says all Bray's done is blindside him when he wasn't looking. And now he wants Bray to put on whatever freak show mask that suits him, walk his ass down to the ring and fight him man to man. Once again, I should point out, I believe LA Knight is supposed to be the heel in this scenario. Meanwhile, every single fucking thing he just said in this segment was absolutely on point true. Up to and including Bray Wyatt jumping him from behind like a coward. But aside from the fact that I have no idea who I'm supposed to cheer for in this situation, at least I can say there was one upside to take away from it. Apparently, Uncle Howdy is real. Hey, you know what? It's plot development. Still guaranteed to wind up being stupid in the end, but at least we've established that Bray and Uncle Howdy are not dual personality gimmicks. Apparently, whoever the geek is that's role-playing Uncle Howdy is distinguishable from Bray. And I use the term role-playing deliberately because, oh my God, I can't believe I'm even talking about this. In any case, it would appear that Bray Wyatt and Uncle Howdy are different characters. So at least we know going forward that this isn't one of those fiend split personality gimmicks. It's still incredibly stupid, but again, man, it's the Bray Wyatt Chronicle of WWE. No matter how idiotic, no matter how inconceivable, no matter how cartoony or terrible it ends up being, you just can't help but be immersed by the absurdity of everything. It's what the House of Drek wishes they could be in AEW. And even though that group is complete horseshit, at least Bray's hocus pocus BS is captivating. So, however you classify it, good, bad, indifferent, it's up to you. But, at least we're finally going somewhere in this never-ending feud. Now we just have to get to the Rumble where LA Knight and Bray actually have the match and see if it's all worth the TV build. Place your bets now. But let's talk about something good, shall we? Ricochet versus Gunther for the Intercontinental Championship. A rematch from a program they apparently had over the summer when Gunther initially beat Ricochet to become the IC champion. You know, and as we know, they did a nice job setting up this rematch by having Ricochet win the World Cup, Delia Bob, and that whole deal. So there was an inbuilt story here. And while I didn't see the first match they had where the initial title switch happened, I can merely assume it was probably on a similar level of quality that this match was. This is great. You know, these are the kinds of matches that Gunther typically flourishes in. He's mastered the scrappy underdog versus big man style. This worked. Ricochet did a lot of his flashy stuff early on, a little bit of early babyface shine. The people were into it. Gunther did a great job cutting him off and working his old school methodical heel style. Every so often they'd give Ricochet some hope spots during the heat, but Gunther would always find ways to cut him off and gain the control again. I still believe that Gunther has the best chops in the business today. Always sounds like he's chopping a big old strip of raw liver anytime I see him do it. Just brutal. And as is normally the case when you put a match together with guys that know what they're doing, it usually ends up growing and building as it progresses. That was kind of reflective of the crowd response here. The first half, I'd say the people really weren't all that into it. They really only started picking up once they got to the near falls at the end, which is kind of sort of the way modern fans have been educated to react. It's unfortunate, but it's just kind of the reality of where we are in the business. But they even built to the near falls very well. Ricochet milked a nice babyface comeback. The people stuck with him the whole time. And I've talked about this before with Ricochet. While his style of match isn't exactly my flavor, I don't think I've ever seen a Ricochet match where the flips and the dives overstay their welcome or just become ridiculous. I'm sure if he were in AEW where he had free reign to do every flip and dive in the book, I'd have gotten sick of him by his second or third match. But he's the perfect fit for the WWE model because he does all the flashy offense, but it's done in moderation and it all has a purpose and a meaning. It's not just, I'm going to do a pointless 450 splash for the sake of doing it, or, let me do this complex corkscrew looking dive out to the floor for no reason, and then we just get back in the ring and do a million other moves. Like, his shit actually looks good. Again, it's not necessarily my flavor, but it works for the WWE crowd, and it's not insulting visually. And I love this fucking finish they went with. They had gone back to the well with the chop exchanges during the latter parts of the match, but the deal at the end where Gunther gives Ricochet the powerbomb and Ricochet kicks out, Gunther goes to try and pick Ricochet up, but Ricochet chops him in the chest one more time, and then Gunther finally hits him with a chop of his own and then kills him with that last symphony move. This worked. I really liked this match. I thought it was one of Ricochet's better TV matches I've seen in a while. Gunther, he obviously goes without saying. Anytime I see him wrestle, it's usually fantastic. Was this on the same level as the Sheamus match from the UK? No, I don't think so. That was a totally different style match, too, so maybe the comparisons aren't fair. But, whenever that match was that Gunther had with Rey Mysterio a few weeks back, I'd say this was on par with that match. Maybe even a little better because the fans were a little more emotionally invested here than the Rey match. And like I said, this is totally in Gunther's wheelhouse. He does extremely well in these kinds of big man, little man matches, and the chemistry these guys had working together here really came through. Really good stuff. Can't say enough good about it. Highly recommend you go out of your way to watch it. And they've left a really interesting case for Gunther's title reign now. Who's the guy that winds up beating him for the belt? It's a fantastic question. They've already kind of teased the program with him and Strowman, and I personally don't think Strowman's beating Gunther for the IC title, nor would I recommend it. I had read somewhere the rumors that they were considering a program with him and Brock Lesnar for WrestleMania next year. I can't really provide much input because it's merely that at the moment, just rumors. However, I'll say this. If they decide to keep the belt on Gunther all the way through Mania, a program with him and Lesnar over the belt could be kind of interesting, actually. If they're strongly considering making that belt a real top secondary singles belt behind the Universal title, doing Lesnar and Gunther for the IC title isn't a bad idea. I don't think Lesnar really needs the belt at this stage in the game, but, if they brought him back to put over Gunther and really solidify his title reign that way, I'd be all for it. The belt still has a long history in the last decade or so of kind of being mistreated and mismanaged. So, I appreciate them taking the effort to try and rectify all that damage previously done. Maybe a next step would be to get a new belt design because the one right now looks very generic and hideous. But we've been barking up that tree for ages now. But I like what they're doing with Gunther in his title reign right now. It's kind of similar to what they were doing when he was wrestling on that NXT UK show where he had that really lengthy title reign. If they're going to follow a similar format with this, cool. Like I said, I'd be down to see Gunther kind of carry that strap for a little while if they wind up doing something really innovative and they want to build like a title versus title match at some point with him and whoever the Universal Champion is down the road. I'd be all for that. Cody comes back, he feuds with Roman for WrestleMania, wins the belt there. You build to some kind of big SummerSlam showdown with Gunther and Cody in like a title for title match. I mean, there's a whole laundry list of ways you could go, but I like what they're doing with him right now. There's a lot of possibilities that could stem from it, but yeah, this gets a big thumbs up for me. Anyhow, moving along with the show, there were a really fun series of pre-tapes in the back with Roman and the Bloodline. I say Roman and the Bloodline as if Roman isn't already part of the group, but I mean, you know what I mean. Anyway, they're going to be doing a tag match on December 30th in 2 weeks. Roman and Sammy versus Kevin Owens and, at the time of this pre-tape here, a partner of his choosing, which may or may not turn out to be Adam Pearce. Nah, it wasn't Adam. But he was in one of the backstage segments here with Roman, Heyman, and Solo. And they kind of spoiled what the whole surprise was before the end of the night, but we'll talk about that in the final segment. After that, we had a three-way tag match with Legado del Fantasma, Hit Row, and the Viking Raiders, which sounded fucking appalling on paper, purely by including Hit Row alone. And between the fact that Hit Row was involved and it was another goddamn three-way, that was about all I needed to know that I was not going to be tuning in to watch that sheer catastrophe. So I went ahead and fast-forwarded through that. Just in time to catch the main event segment of the program. After learning that next week's SmackDown will feature the following segments: a gauntlet match with 6 girls to determine the challenger for Ronda's title, and a Miracle on 34th Street fight with Imperium, Ricochet, and Brawny the Strowman. Good fucking Christ, they are just begging people to tune out. No other way to view that. And upon second viewing of that card on paper, perhaps that would be my cue to skip out on that show entirely. Maybe I will, because if there's ever a show that screams fuck off show, next week is surely giving me those vibes. Maybe it'll give me an excuse to start recording my top 20 matches of the year portion of the podcast special. But as for the final segment of the show, better known as the Bloodline Commencement Ceremony for Sami Zayn, his official initiation into the Bloodline as not Honorary Uso, but Sammy Uso. And while I had a great deal of technical issues trying to watch all this unfold, it definitely did not disappoint in execution. Well, depending on how you look at it. I don't know if the buffering issues were only on my end or if anybody else was having problems watching, but I got a lot of freeze framing and skipping while I was trying to watch the last 15 minutes of the show. Something really out of whack with my DVR. In any case, they spent the first several minutes here with Roman putting over the big tag match in 2 weeks. And they had this great little angle where Sammy was talking about Kevin Owens being a cancer to his career and how he's weighed him down for so long. But the truth of the matter is that Kevin has always been Sammy's only friend. And realizing that he done fucked up saying that line, he gets the big, oh shit reaction from the crowd. Because Sammy acknowledged the friendship between him and Kevin. Now, of course, he tried to disavow it by saying that Kevin was Sammy's only friend. Keyword was, not anymore. Allegedly. And that was all great because now it kind of plays into the story of the match in 2 weeks. Even though Sammy showed his allegiance to the Bloodline in War Games by helping them win, there's still that seed of doubt being planted right now. Still that question of whether or not Sammy still has an allegiance to his longtime friend Kevin Owens. So that was well done. I like that little detail. And before they can get too knee-deep with expanding on that story, who should randomly pop up on screen but good old Captain Fruity Pebble himself, Jonathan Felix Anthony Cena, who apparently has not been hitting the testosterone supplements in recent times. He sounded oddly higher pitched than normal. Maybe it was just the audio. Anyway, long story short, he did a bunch of hokey, unfunny comedy that sounded just as lame as when he was doing that bullshit 15 years ago. He sold the story that he has not wrestled a match in the entirety of 2022, which would be the first time in 20-something years where he would go a full calendar year having not wrestled. So, yeah, he's going to be KO's partner on the final SmackDown of 2022. Okay, then. Don't really have much of an opinion on that one way or the other. Does anybody even remember the last match that John Cena wrestled in WWE off the top of their head? I don't remember what it was. If it happened in 2021, I certainly don't remember. I do remember there was that horrid, wacky Funhouse match he had with Bray Wyatt at WrestleMania one year, but was that 2021 or 2020? God, I don't even know it's been so long. I mean, physically, he looked fine here with a t-shirt on. He's still got his all-natural, super veiny forearms and biceps, so I guess you could say he's in good condition. I don't expect the match to be any good because John Cena's in it, but hey, good on him. Coming in to soak up a paycheck where he can hit a few lousy punches, do his 5 moves of doom, get in and get out. Probably getting a pinfall on Sami Zayn in the process, which is exactly the kind of thing you want to see close out the year 2022. Can you imagine that visual? John Cena beating Sami Zayn clean in the middle of the ring and then disappearing for another 6 months or so while Sami is being positioned for a big spot headed into 2023. Sounds like WWE booking for you. Can you tell I'm not a John Cena fan? I know, hard to imagine. Anyway, at least I could take away one positive from SmackDown this week. Gunther and Ricochet tore down the house with a great IC title match. And everything else in the middle was the usual filler material that we've all come to expect by now. I mean, it wasn't horrible, but my God, dude. I mean, at least Dynamite gives me several crappy things that I can rant about every week. SmackDown, I watch this stuff happen and I'm like, why? I mean, I guess I kind of went on a semi-rant on the whole Bray Wyatt thing, but that was more so just conceding the fact that I know it's all going to be bullshit in the end. I feel bad for LA Knight because he's really trying to make the most out of that. Also, he probably winds up getting served up to Bray on a silver platter when they blow the match off. Boy, is that a shame. But with 2 SmackDowns left in the year, kind of expect this will be the formula for the remainder of the year. The holidays are typically a bad time for TV, and WWE is notorious for producing bad content this time of year, more than normal. Yeah, but once we get to Rumble season, I'm sure things will start picking up again. I'm still looking forward to Cody's return. I like the direction they're taking with the Bloodline stuff right now, and I think that'll end up having a big payoff at the Rumble event. So there is some stuff to look forward to. For the time being, though, we'll start looking ahead for this coming Friday show. Still trying to figure out the best time to program the holiday special. Like I said, if I don't review SmackDown next week, maybe I can just plug it into next week's Monday podcast, which may not be a bad idea now that I think about it. We'll probably throw the Retro Raw report in there too, but if that winds up being a longer show, so be it. I do have some topics that I want to touch on again, in addition to running down my top matches of the year, so stay posted for all that. And as we draw closer to the holiday season, make sure you're all staying safe out there and trying to not engage in the chaos of Christmas shopping. I still can't believe that's a thing people do. Last minute Christmas shopping, where the entire fucking population winds up at the mall 24 hours before Christmas Day. I mean, we do live in different times. Most people do all their shopping online anymore. Maybe COVID upticks will keep people indoors, but I mean, even at this stage, I don't really think people give a shit anymore, and quite frankly, I don't blame them. But in any case, just be safe out there. Anyway, thanks for watching. We'll be back on Friday. Take care. Peace.